All right. So, last week we talked about John 15. And like I mentioned last week, this week we're going to end up going over, we're going to start going over love and the different forms of love as we continue this whole thing about relationships. So, particularly what was highlighted from John 15 were 9 through 17. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. And now remain in my love. If you obey my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have obeyed my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that he may lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I have learned from my Father I have made known to you.
Sorry, where was this in? John what?
John 15.
Oh, it is.
You did not choose me, but I chose you, and appointed you to go and bear fruit that will last. Then the Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. This is my command: love each other.
So in general, we're not Jesus' friends unless we do what he says and love one another. That sounds very simple, but it's kind of hard to do with some people.
Well, the matter of doing what he commands ultimately ends up being a showing of allegiance in that sense. It's the same way that you might tease your friends, but you don't do things to blatantly hurt your friends or to blatantly push them away. If you call somebody your friend, you do what you can to be with them. And even though you might do things to mess with them or whatever, you don't reject them. You don't ghost them, you don't do things to ultimately just drive them away from you. You don't act aggressively to scare them. You don't act cruelly to hurt them.
Yeah, sure.
And the thing of it is that in this kind of light, ultimately the things that Jesus commands us are really simple things from that kind of respect. So when he talks about if you obey my commands, he literally goes on to say his command, which is love each other as I have loved you. But see, the big thing here is, like, initially I thought we were going to be talking about, like, God's love. But specifically, when it comes down to Christian relationships, the core principle here that we're apparently going over pertains specifically to interpersonal love within the body, within the community, within the church. So, the kind of core principle here is looking at Jesus' example and specifically what he commands in this light. There's an interesting kind of context to this statement. So before he talks about any of this, just a couple chapters earlier, we look in John 13. And that's the part where Jesus goes to illustrate a point relating to his disciples as far as what it looks like to give one's life, what it looks like to be to love other people. And if people want to open to that, we'll go ahead and just read through it.
Sorry, where again?
John 13.
13. You want someone else to read?
Yep. Go ahead and go verse 3 through 12, or 3 through 11.
3 through 11?
Mm-hmm.
Could you read that for us, Shane?
Yeah. John 13, 3 to 11. 3 to 11.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything and that he had come to God and would return to God. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. When Jesus came to Simon Peter, Peter said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You don't understand now what I am doing, but someday you will." "No," Peter protested, "you will never ever wash my feet." Jesus replied, "Unless I wash you, you won't belong to me." Simon Peter exclaimed, "Then wash my hands and head as well, Lord, not just my feet." Jesus replied, "A person who has bathed all over does not need to wash except for his feet, to be entirely clean. And you disciples are clean, but not all of you." For Jesus knew who would betray him. That is what he meant when he said, "Not all of you are clean."
All right. And then does somebody else want to read verses 12 through 20?
I'll read that.
Okay.
When he washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, "Do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is no greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. I am not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen. But the scripture will be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I am telling you this now before it takes place, that when it does take place, you may believe that I am he. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever receives the one I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me."
So, the gist of this example that Jesus gave to his disciples was illustrating his love and how far he's willing to lower himself. There's a really important statement there, and that was the first one, which is Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. The value in this being an understanding and a recognition of who he was, who he is, and yet understanding that, recognizing that, he illustrated this place of lowering himself, debasing himself. The way that Hebrews described it, he put himself lower than the angels. Taking on this human form and illustrating what it is to take care of other people, to love other people, and illustrating how far we go with that. Like, for those around the room, have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to take such intimate care of somebody as to bathe them, to wash their feet, to take care of them in such a way where you have to kind of get over your own inhibitions in order to help them?
Yeah.
Some of us have had older families, some of us have had people who in our lives who were injured, who were hurt, and we had to go those extra miles, sponge baths, things like that. We do those things out of care to take care of the other person, but given the choice, when it comes down to they need this in order to keep functioning as a person, we'll do it. But will we do the same thing for just because they need it?
Does it count if your friend was drunk?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. The point is that you took care of him when he needed it, right?
I'm just making sure there's no technicalities, right?
Oh, God, no. I mean, the only technicality is if you just really wanted to put hands on him or something like that. At which point, yeah, no, that's messed up.
That's icky.
So, but to go on further with this point of who Jesus was and who Jesus is, we go on to Mark 10. And there's another passage here to look at, because it pertains to this character and this illustration, and more than that, him sharing points. And we've gone over this many, many times, so I'm just going to go ahead and read through it. But it's Mark 10, and we'll be going over verses 41 through 45. But the context of it is that John and James, the two brothers as disciples, they walked up and they were asking Jesus if they could sit at his right and left hand. They wanted to be the very best around him. And he posed them some questions about the baptism that he had and asking them if they could receive that. And even when they said they could, naively, he ultimately told them, well, you can't actually have those positions that you want.
Wait, what positions did they want?
They wanted to, they wanted one to sit at the right hand and the other at the left hand when he found himself in his glory, when he was enthroned on the kingdom, on the throne.
Oh.
So, starting in 41, when the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So the point in all of this, the gist of it, is that in the relationships that we have, when Jesus talks about giving one's life for another, there's no greater love than that. We oftentimes take it into consideration. We take it to this very literal place. If I take a bullet for Chelsea, that shows my love for her as a person.
I would take a bullet for most people.
Exactly.
Not all, but most.
Yeah.
I would give a bullet to some. That counts as
That's
giving.
true love, Chelsea.
You know.
Right. But the point here is that we take it to that specific place. But something that Jesus illustrates time and time again, that giving your life for somebody else isn't that literal. It is, but it isn't. There are also elements of giving up your pride, giving up your ego, pouring yourself out into a situation or into a circumstance. The kind of thing where you lay yourself out on the table, expose the nature of your heart and soul and what that looks like, and allow that and do your best to work with that in order to help the people around you, in order to preserve people. And that's a lot harder than getting shot for somebody else. There are a lot of people in the army and the military in general who that's their job. Police officers, that's kind of their job.
And it hurts.
Yeah. But it takes a lot more, in many cases, than a one-time thing to go over and over and over to your ailing grandfather's house to give him a sponge bath because he can't actually, take care of himself anymore, to cook his meals, to bathe him, to make sure his medication is proper, to get to pay his bills, to do those kinds of things. The reality of it is that there's a level of caring for each other that we should be more than capable of and more than willing to do. And that's something that ultimately comes down to the question of our heart and where we're really at. There's some people who are just naturally inclined to this. One thing that I've been going over recently with another group was we've been talking about the offices, as talked about in Ephesians 4. I think it's 4:10, 4:15, somewhere in there. Anyway, but it talks about how some are given to be prophets, apostles, teachers, pastors / shepherds, and evangelists. It's only 5, but the reality of it is that for many there's a kind of natural call of the heart that drags us into these places of being able or willing to do certain things. Some people are naturally inclined to be shepherds. And for the people that are naturally inclined to being shepherds, this stuff comes a lot more easily than somebody who's, say, inclined to be an evangelist. Just to give like a clarification on what that looks like, with evangelists, they tend to be more forward-moving, they have a propensity for shallower relationships, they want to constantly reach out to people, they want people to be saved, but once the people are saved, they don't really have a lot more depth for them a lot of the time, unless they've been kind of like walked through that and further in their ministry. But the point is that there are elements of us and our people that do make some of these things difficult to hear and especially to do. But see, the thing of it is that regardless of what kind of a person you are, we're all called into this very similar place. Being willing to love other people and to give yourself up in the process of that is not something that's called for only one select cadre of people. That's something that's called for the entire body of Christians. Even using that example of the evangelist and the shepherd and so on, there are places where an evangelist, despite their proclivities, they still have things that they can offer to the rest of the people in the church and are able to give of themselves to be that something. The same is true with every other office. And the same is true with every person in general. We all have something that we're able to give, and we all have something that we're able to be to other people. And the truth of the matter is that we all have the capacity to see the needs of other people, and even if we can't meet them, we might know somebody who can. And at the core of us, when it comes down to community, and when it comes down to functioning as a church, as a group of people following Jesus and the example that he illustrated to us, there are places where we can be more than just a bunch of people throwing money at each other or things like that in order to try to make it and fix a boo-boo. There are places where we are equipped to be more, to do more. And in a community where we are called to love one another, there is this place of meeting needs, but there's also a place of seeing people for who they really are. And this was another thing that drove Jesus at the core of what he did so often. There was a place of him trying to not only meet people and see people restored, but also to be seen for who he was, and that is the very essence of God in human form. To kind of go on with that, and even in that particular thing, there was a side of this of bringing other people into this place. See, there's a funny thing that happens when you see people that are functioning within the realms of this kind of being, is that they draw other people into these kinds of places. See, a lot of us are comparative in nature. We look at other people and say, well, I want to be like that, or why can't I be like that? And while that's not necessarily a good thing, it can be beneficial in this regard of recognizing where we lack. If you see somebody that you particularly respect or see as being really great, you might seek to emulate certain aspects of their person. Or, in a more healthy scenario, you're able to recognize where the things you lack but also understand that these other people around you are illustrations of what is possible. And recognizing that there truly is nothing that holds us back from being the kinds of people that we're called to be, then maybe we can move forward with that instead of having it be the kind of thing where we look down on ourselves as being less. Another passage for tonight that I was given was out of John 12. And it was this place where Jesus talks about... Oh, I'll explain it. Anyway, it's John 12:23 through 26. Jesus replied, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. The man who loves his life will lose it, while the man who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honor the one who serves me." One of the key statements to look at, and that was really highlighted to me when going over what this was supposed to be, was that point about the kernel of wheat, and how if it dies, it creates many. The picture there being that if you get a head of wheat and the kernel falls off from it to the ground, then it will grow more plants. And see, in the same vein, it is these places where we die to ourselves. And just to get around the kind of whatever assumptions of what that means, let's go ahead and explain that in the sense that dying to yourself means setting aside the person that you think you are. It means setting aside the person that you want to believe you are. It means setting aside the person that you prefer to believe you are. And it means functioning in the person that you actually are. And in that place, dying to all the letting go of all these little attributes of our person and our ego specifically, that we build up into something completely and utterly ridiculous. There are so many things that the world has developed and that we view as being successful or righteous or grandiose in some form or another, and almost all of them stand in direct opposition to everything that Jesus was and represented, everything that he is to this day. And in that place, in those particular places, those are where we talk about dying to ourselves. A while back, we're all familiar with, we can go on to a number of different stories. The point is that we see so many illustrations of churches and pastors and so on, where they talk a good game about helping people, but they don't actually do it. Because at the end of the day, their proclivity is to be served by the body around them and by the people around them. They want other people to support them, but always, always, always to come underneath them. When the point of a pastor in any way, shape, or form, whether that's the modern title applied to a leader of a church, or that's the legitimate pastor shepherd that Paul referenced when he described the fivefold ministry and what that looks like. The point of a pastor is always to come underneath the people around them and to elevate them. I had a friend who was preaching a message a while back. It's one of the pastors at a church, and he described how God's kingdom is inverted. It's upside down and on its head, when he was talking about Mark 10 specifically, about the point that so often what we want and what we strive for is even in places where we want to be the best Christians, We do it because we want that honor. We want that respect. We want other people to see us, to appreciate us, to hear our names. And the problem with all of that is that God is the only person who really matters in this equation. And he already knows your name. So if you're looking for honor on earth, you're wasting your time. And all that you're going to do is you're going to develop a kingdom of your own, and a bunch of people around you who look to you for guidance, who look to you to be something to them, and they will never see you for who you are. They will only see and appreciate what you have done for them and who you have been to them, and as a result of that, you will end up walking away feeling used. So in this place, it calls for us, and when I say used, it will be because your ego wasn't being stroked, just to clarify specifically where this point is going. In the places where we are willing to die to ourselves, in those little places where we want the honor, respect, and whatever else, those are the places where we can, in fact, come underneath everyone, to elevate the church, to elevate the body, to be something for God, to God's people. To be an illustration of him, because at the end of the day, when you're in that place where your heart is given over to this place of wanting to help other people, of wanting to serve them, in that regard, there's no ego to be hurt when they end up using you, or when they end up walking away, or when they end up doing whatever else. There are places where it can hurt if you're devoted to that relationship, but as far as the place of being seen and honored and respected and whatever else that you look for validation, it doesn't matter. Jesus didn't give anything that he gave to be glorified in the sense of being put on a pedestal for people. He gave everything because it was necessary, because it was needed, because he cared for the people around him. He wept for them, he prayed for them, he loved them, because he saw their value and who they were. And the only thing that was desired was that they would see who he was and understand who he was and what he represented. And then he would die for them. For us. So, in this place, discussing the realities of what it is to love one another, in the church body and in our communities, that is very much so a place that doesn't see us being anything to them in the sense of grabbing a title and holding that up to them and saying, this is who I am to you. If I show up into a random group and tell them I'm a leader and you have to listen to me, and then try to establish my authority, I'm wrong. Whatever I might actually be, it doesn't matter, because in that place, I have abused whatever titles I've had, and I've set a circumstance where they can't grow. It's all right. In their relationships with God, because I will be in the way. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
In so many ways, what Jesus sought when he came down to who he was glorifying with the work that he did, it was to glorify the Father, to glorify God. And that should be our same heart position. That should be our same desire and our same priority. If it's not, then it's about us. It's really, really simple. And sometimes those aren't. And I know that there's a lot of this that comes across as being almost very condemning in aspects. And some could even say that some of this message is even a little harsh. And there is a place to understand that there are times where people come to things trying to be something, and they are well-intentioned. To say that somebody is evil because their prerogative is misconstrued or is askew is also wrong. There are plenty of circumstances where a person shows up to a community and they try to establish themselves as a leader because they see something that's wrong, and their intention, as far as they can understand, is that they're doing their best to be that person to fulfill the need of that group. There are a lot of people that want to be a one-man show in the sense of being everything to everybody all the time.
That's me. Not gonna lie.
Yeah. They basically want to show up and be everything that God can make them to be. But see, the truth is they can't. That's exhausting. But their intentions in that are good. They mean well. They're not trying to stand in between people in their relationship with God. They're not trying to blind people. They honestly are trying to help. But that's where a lot of this other stuff comes in, where we need other people to be around us and other people to see our personal need. If I am that person showing up and doing the thing, trying to help in my own misguided way, I'm going to need other people to come around me and say, hey, bro, you're wrong here. And it's not even in the sense that you're wrong, it's just that this is what you're doing. And I would need to be humble enough to listen to that. And just to like further flesh out that little example so we have like a clear vision of what that looks like, even in those places of people showing up and saying, hey, you're wrong, it's like, hey, you're wrong, but we want to help you move into the right place here. Just as that person wants to help them move into the right places. It should be that kind of thing where we function together. Ideally, it's going to be that kind of thing where we function together. And people get the help that they need. Where people are loved on and cared for as they need. Whatever that need is, that will be met and that will be tended. But to continue on with that point about the people that misguidedly are trying to help and whatnot, the big struggle here with a lot of us is seeing things that we don't want to or can't see. And I say it that way because it is ultimately self-defeating. It's difficult to get past our own pretenses and our own presets of what we view ourselves to be. When I talk about that point about, dying to yourself and dropping all those little aspects of our character that stand in between us and God, and especially the things that can stand between other people and God when we show up, those things are not always apparent. Which means we need to have other people around us who can see them. Because ultimately, the whole goal of the church, in and of itself, was to be a community that functions together. There's a reason why Paul describes it as one whole body, as opposed to a bunch of little islands that have banded together to create one great big fleet. No, it's a body because everything functions with itself and with another part. Everything's attached and working together to go forward, to follow God, to live with God, to serve God, to be close to God. That's why it's painted in this light, because it's not meant to be a one-man show for anybody. Jesus was the one-man show. He was the guy that showed up and says, hey, this is what this all looks like. In that regard, he was the only one, and his relationship with his Father was so close, and even with his disciples was close enough to where he could be that. Honestly, a lot of us don't have that. The truth of the matter is a lot of us are not that close to our Father. We're not that close to God to be able to just go back to him and receive everything that we could ever need from him. And that's partly by design. We're going to need each other. We're going to need other people in order to continue forward in this life and function in any way, shape, or form. And the reality is, without them, we'll crumble. Because those things that we don't see about ourselves, they'll kill us. They'll strangle out anything, any ability to be anything more than what we are at the moment, whatever our biggest struggle is. If my biggest struggle is being alone and feeling alone, then is that going to be fixed by making myself be alone? No, but we don't think about these things in that way. If my greatest, instead we reset back to things that are comfortable, and we stick in those places. If we're comfortable being alone, even though we hate it, we'll stay there. If I'm constantly struggling with being stressed, even though I hate being stressed, I'll still go back to that, and whatever it is that causes me to be stressed will be a place that I stick to, even seeking out things that allow me to stay in that place. Will I hate it? Yes. Will it make me suffer? Absolutely. But I'll stay there, because I don't see it for what it is. I don't see everything outside of that. And that's where it helps to have people who can see another perspective. Because ultimately, one of the beautiful things about people is that we all have different perspectives. And if we're willing to throw those out there in care for another person, then we are actually able to help them. So, the last thing here to go over is to go back to that place about the kernel and the way that when it dies it grows. There's also a place of being able to inspire other people to greater acts of love through your love. And that's one of the more important things to take away from this is understand that there are a lot of places and a lot of ways where what you give to the world you will get back. If you're constantly pouring out bitterness, people around you will be bitter. There are a number of studies that indicate different things, and the science on them is questionable, but nevertheless, there are a lot of them. And some of them include things like people who think or function a different way actually have an effect on the world around them in the sense that their mind actually changes the environment around them. The words that you speak have a power to affect the people around you. Your tone has a power to affect the people around you. If you're full of bitterness, piss, and anger, yeah, other people around you will noticeably change response. If you're constantly running on nothing but depression, and that shapes and molds your view of life, yeah, you'll have an effect on the people around you. If you're willing to, like, in the same way, if you're the kind of person that shows up and just makes a lot of jokes, and filled with kind of a natural mirth, yeah, you'll have an effect on the people around you. Yeah, sure.
Obviously.
Hopefully I have a good effect on
It's kind of racist, but it's good. But and see, likewise, if we come out of a place where it's not about our egos and our personal motivations, but it really is a place of like genuine sacrificial love for the people around us, that will have a significant effect on the people around you. It feels like a moot point to say it, because I think we've all run into people at various times here and there who have been that to us. There are people who we describe as having been Jesus to us at one time or another. At some point. And that's kind of the thing of it, where we can see where they've affected us in the sense of bringing about something. And that's something that we're trying to bring about here specifically, is this place that Jesus describes as being the kingdom of God. It's a funny thing, actually, because we're all familiar with the kingdom of God and the kingdom of heaven, and how that's described throughout the Gospels, where Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is here and the kingdom of God is like this. But see, the funny thing about that is that the Greek word for kingdom actually translates more adequately to reign. So I don't know why we say kingdom, because it actually kind of belies the point that Jesus was making. What Jesus kept saying was the reign of God looks like this. The reign of God is in this place. So here in this, when there is a community full of people who are devoted to God and have dropped themselves by the wayside in order to serve each other and to serve God above all else, that is an illustration of the reign of God. And that is a place that has the ability to affect us and to change us, to mold us and to take us to places that are not where we have been or where we're comfortable being. When I talk about that place where we're sitting in areas that we hate, whether that's stress or depression, anger, bitterness, whatever example you want to give, even just being lost or numb, being in that place in the midst of people who seek God, and especially in God's presence, because He will be there among them, that will motivate you to change, and that will affect you to change, because it changes the perspective that you're able to carry. If you believe that God seeks community for you, but you've never experienced community, and lo and behold you find yourselves in a community like that, well, suddenly you have an example of where community can look like that, where it can be like that. And an even bigger thing is that you can develop that community wherever you are, because it pertains to you and what you pour out to the people around you. Too often we don't heed these kinds of messages, and instead it comes down to, well, I'm going to go seek out some people who fulfill me and affirm me, instead of being somebody who fulfills and affirms. We want to be spectators when we're called into a place of being servants. So, with that, and with this discussion, this kind of illustration of what love looks like, I'm just left with a couple of questions to leave you guys with and to think about. They aren't for answering now, but they are for answering in times of prayer. Throughout the course of the week. We could call it homework, but it's really not. Are you given to following Jesus' example? Are you pouring yourself out for the people around you? And are you doing that with expectations that they will do something for you, or are you doing that with expectations for them to change? Is your hope that they will be affected, or is your hope that they will return what you have done to you? Is it about them, or is it about you? Do you do good things for them, or do you do good things because you want good things to happen to you?
One's like a selfless act and one's like a selfish act.
Exactly. But it's easy to justify it. And then the other question is, are you even pouring yourself out? Or have you walled yourself up in a little ball of justifications for why you shouldn't have to? Have you buried yourself under a collection of reasons for why you shouldn't have to be anything more than what you are? Or to put that better, in a different way, are you too busy justifying yourself, your lack of care for people, or your resentment for people, to see where that's affecting you and sticking and trapping you in a place, a prison of your own making? Do you recognize that this is a real place, and do you recognize who's responsible for it? That it has nothing to do with them and everything to do with you. And that's what I got.